We are talking about thanks for giving over the next couple of weeks. I know that last week you all shared in a wonderful video about a military family who was blessed by the giving of an anonymous donor. And it was a beautiful story. This ILikeGiving.com is a great site to visit, and I encourage you to do so as you think about what it means to give it to others this Thanksgiving. And yet we know that we give to others in thanks for all that God has given to us. And so it is today that I'd like to focus on why it is that we give in thanks. And our scripture reading this morning is going to be from Psalms. But before we go there, I wanted to share with you just kind of a little tidbit that made me start thinking about what this means. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my children, and they were having a little dinner snack, and it was on Friday afternoon, and one had a cheese enchilada and one had a little pizza. And of course they started bartering because they both liked what the other one had. And one had the cheese enchilada, gave a big old portion to share with his brother. And then his brother reached over and said, "Here, you can have this," and gave him a little crumb of pizza about this big. And I said, "Hey, dude, come on. You can't expect to get something without giving something back." And then I thought, oh, wait, guys, I got to write that down for my sermon. So I wrote it down because we can't expect to get all that we have been given to God without giving something in return. And so that is why we give, out of simple thanks for the bounty that God has given to us. And the psalm brings us into what that means a little bit. I'm going to read from Psalm 118 this morning. And it's a beautiful psalm. I'm going to only focus on a couple of verses of it, but I want to kind of put it in context for you a little bit. Because it talks to us about what it means to give thanks to God for what God has done in our past, what God is doing in this moment, and what God is doing in our future. Those three things we're going to focus on today. And it starts out in wonderful liturgy that you can hear the people repeating as they repeat over and over again, "His steadfast love endures forever." The psalmist says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good." And the congregation say, "His steadfast love endures forever." Let Israel say, "His steadfast love endures forever." Let the house of Aaron say, "His steadfast love endures forever." Let those who fear the Lord say, "His steadfast love endures forever." All of these people who have gone through history with God, the people who have become Israel, recognizing that the steadfast love of God has been with them from the beginning in all of their journeys. And then we come to the place where the psalmist says, "Out of my distress I called on the Lord, and the Lord answered me and set me to a broad place." We're going to talk about what it means to be in a broad place in a little bit. "With the Lord on my side, I do not fear. What can mortals do to me?" It's that assurance that God is with us. In the midst of all of our difficulties, God is present. "The Lord is on my side to help me. I shall look in triumph on those who hate me." It's better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in mortals. A reminder that our thanks comes out of the assurance that God is on our side. There's nothing that can happen to us in our world that will defeat us entirely, because that steadfast love of God is with us. "I shall not die, but I shall live. And I thank you for that you have answered me, have become my salvation." This is the Lord's doing. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. For you are my God. I will give thanks to you. You are my God. I will extol you. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. I ran across a story this week. It was a cute little story about a woman who was working in a mall, and she decided to go on a coffee break. And she went up to the store, a little store, and she bought herself a packet of cookies, and she put it in her bag. And then she went up to the counter and got her coffee, and then she sat down. She had her little bag next to her, and she was reading a book and sipping on her coffee. And then she noticed there was a man sitting next to her reading a newspaper. And so she's sitting there drinking her coffee, reading her book, and he's sitting next to her reading his newspaper. And so she reaches in her bag and she grabs a cookie, and she takes a bite, and she notices that the man next to her also grabs a cookie out of her bag and starts eating it. She thinks, well, that's a little strange, but she just doesn't say anything. She's trying to be polite and minds her own business. She's just, eating her cookie and drinking her coffee. And then she reaches down to get another cookie out of her bag, and the guy reaches in and gets a cookie too and starts eating it. And she thinks, okay, this is really odd. And then the same thing happens. The third cookie, she reaches in and he does the same, grabs a cookie and starts eating it. And then she notices there's one cookie left. And so now she's kind of irritated because she thinks, this guy's eating half my cookies. And all of a sudden she notices that this guy grabs the cookie, breaks it in half, and gives her the other half. And he eats the other half of the cookie and he just walks off. And she thinks, oh my goodness, this man is so incredibly ungrateful. He's eaten all my cookies. And then she looks down in her bag and she sees a bag of unopened cookies. And she realized that she's been the one eating his cookies. Oh, that feeling, isn't it, when we realize that we've forgotten to give thanks for what we don't deserve. Happens to us every day. Happens to us every day, I believe, in our walk with God, because everything that we have is God's gift to us. And we forget in the abundance of what we have to stop and pause and to give thanks. To give thanks for all that God has given us. And it is a gift to be able to pause. Leviticus 22, this whole idea of thanksgiving and stopping and pausing to give thanks to God started out 2,500 years ago with Leviticus 22, when it was called upon the people to stop and to feast on the bounty that God has given, and to give thanks for 7 days. 7, the perfect number. To give thanks for 7 days. We do one, right? And a lot of times we focus on all of the things, I think, that God gives us. And so what I want us to focus on today is the idea of God's presence with us, of giving thanks for that. First of all, God's presence with us in our past. God's presence with us in our past. It starts out with this passage talking about the presence of God with the Israelites, with the house of Aaron, and how God has walked with us through the wilderness, literally. And we can look back on our lives, I think, and our vision is 2020, and we can see God's hand all over our lives, don't we? And I want to mention that because I know that some of you might be going into Thanksgiving week with some stuff on your plate. A lot of us are of that baggage of our past, whether it's meeting with family with whom we have had rifts or troubles, or whether it's coming into Thanksgiving, the first year of a loss in your life. I got a text from a woman this year whose father's funeral I performed, and she was very young, and her father died at a very young age, very, very suddenly. And she sent me this text, which blew me away. She said, I just wanted to take time to tell you thank you. Thank you for being a part of my life, because your presence and the presence of the church has helped us get through this year. To pause and to give thanks, recognizing that even in the midst of those strained times of our lives, that the steadfast love of God is with us. Through the people around us, through the reminders of memories, and that love is what we hold on to as we go into these situations, as we go into this week. The assurance that God, who has been our salvation, has been our deliverance in the past, will continue to do so in those situations where we're not so sure that we can handle it. The assurance that the steadfast love of the Lord is with us now. And then the presence of God in this moment today. I think it's really helpful for us to take this pause for Thanksgiving and be reminded of one of the verses from 1 Thessalonians, which talks about how we are to give thanks to God in all circumstances. To have a joyful heart and to give thanks to God in all circumstances, that's a really, really hard thing to do. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm in circumstances that I'm not so happy about, it's pretty hard for me to give thanks. And I was talking to a friend of mine recently. She's kind of a spiritual mentor for me. And she shared with me this phrase that stuck. And she said, instead of asking God, why is this happening to me? Asking, how is this happening for me? Instead of asking, why is this happening to me, God? Why is all of this stuff on my plate? Why am I feeling so overwhelmed? Why am I having to work 2 jobs to make ends meet? Why is this cancer in my family right now? Why am I struggling to have faith? Instead of asking that question, asking, how is this happening for me? How is God at work in my life? Help me to see it. Help me to see that, God, that you are a God who is Emmanuel, God with us. For that's what Jesus came to tell us, isn't it? Jesus came to tell us that God is here in the here and now. If we can just only have the vision to see it. Not just 2020 vision, but to pause and take stock of our life and to see the presence of God that is within it. A dear friend of mine on staff, who quite honestly has been going through a very difficult time the past couple of years. I was talking with her about this sermon, and she shared with me, you know what I did the past couple of weeks? I wrote down 100 things that I am thankful for and wrote scriptures next to each one. Wow. I was so impressed by this. I was like, you have to send me this list. This is amazing. 100 things that she's thankful for. And when I asked her about it, she said, you know, when I started, it really wasn't that hard. It really wasn't that hard to stop and look and take stock of my life. And it's things like having coffee with a friend, right? That joy of being able to spend time with a friend of which you're thankful for, or the joy of the rain that comes to remind you of the refreshment of God in creation, or to be thankful for the simple act of being able to contribute, to give something back in your work and in your play and in your relationships, to pause and to take stock of her life. I encourage us all to do that this week, to give thanks in those moments that we have each and every day of God's blessings among us. And you know, when we're surrounded by such an incredible bounty, it's hard in the midst of abundance, I think, to do that. There's a power of scarcity. There's a power of scarcity where when we receive something for the very first time, we're so surprised and shocked. But when we're surrounded by it all day long, we just take it for granted. There's a wonderful practice, and I'm not encouraging you to do this for your Thanksgiving meal because it would be a little strange, but there's this wonderful practice of eating in silence. Maybe for some of you that would be a great practice to do in your Thanksgiving meal, depending on the family that's joining you. I don't know. But the idea is you're eating in silence, and it's a monastic practice in which, as you're eating, you're considering from whence your food came. The seeds that were planted to create the vegetables, the rain that fell, and the sun that nurtured those seeds. And as it grew, the farmer that nurtured it and encouraged it and plucked it up, and the granaries that helped to produce that bread. Now, I know there are those of you who are kind of in mourning about the granary union and the Twinkie collapse this week. But there are so many things of which we're thankful for our farmers and what they do, and to eat and to be mindful. To be mindful of from whence our food came. It's those details that in our abundance we forget. We forget to give thanks for each and every day. And then to give thanks for that assurance of God with us in the future. That idea that the psalmist is talking about, that God has been my salvation. And that enduring love will continue all the days of my life. That assurance of what salvation isn't just of the past, isn't just of this moment, but is for the future as well. And so we can walk each day saying, this is the day the Lord has made. Let me rejoice in this day and be glad in it. Even in the midst of our failing economy, and what that future might look like, and this fiscal cliff that's going to happen on January the 1st, right? I was listening to a commentary who was talking about who is this fiscal cliff guy anyway? Is this guy at a party who's like the nerdy accountant? You know, you go out, but don't go by fiscal cliff. Fiscal cliff is this dread that we've got for our future of our nation. But what if we were to approach even that with the assurance that God is with us? Our nation, our world. That God is with us even in the midst of that, providing salvation for our future. Because that's what steadfast love is all about. Steadfast love, not conditional love, not love that if we do something, we'll get something back. It's a love that's steadfast and blesses us each and every day. And provides us that assurance of being able to walk into our future. One of the things that kind of, I have to admit, bugs me about the Psalms is how it talks about all of the stuff that God does. You know, God does this and I'm thankful. God did this for me and I'm thankful. God's gonna do this for me and I'm thankful, right? God answered me. God delivered me. Even sometimes God punished me. But the idea of giving thanks in all circumstances, it's a good thing. But I don't think that's all there is to it. And this is why. Is because I was thinking a lot about that passage in Exodus where Moses is standing on holy ground. And God's giving him this call to, go out in the world and go out to Israel and go back to this land that he's quite honestly scared of, because there's kind of a price out on his head, right? He's scared to go back. And he said, well, who am I supposed to say sent me? And God says, I am. Tell him the I am sent you. This idea of a God that we can't fully understand. And so what does it mean to give thanks to a God that we can't understand? A God that we don't know what completely has happened in our past to get us to where we are today. And we're not completely aware of how God is moving in our midst on this day. And we certainly can't predict what God's presence will be like in our future, although we are sure of it. But what does it mean to give thanks simply to the God who is the unknown, the mystery, the great I am? I believe it is to simply give thanks for the opportunity of relationship, for the opportunity that God cares enough to show up in person through Jesus Christ. That steadfast love is so strong that God's desire for relationship isn't necessarily dependent on our thanks, but is blessed by our thanks. Because when we receive thanks, what happens? We feel good, right? We feel good when we're given thanks. We realize not only the gratitude that's present, but the impact we've had on another person's life. And the more we give thanks to God, I think, quite honestly, if we're in relationship, that is a blessing to God as well. It not only helps us to be mindful of giving thanks for God's presence and God's relationship, however we cannot even understand it, that we give thanks simply for the opportunity to be in relationship with God each and every day and all the days of our life. And so this Thanksgiving, let's pause. Let's take a moment to say, God, thanks for giving. Let us pray. Oh God, you are a God who is good, and your steadfast love endures forever. Sometimes we can't understand that love, God. Sometimes we can't predict it. Sometimes we can't even see it in our midst. And so, dear God, give us the eyes to see and the ears to hear and the hands to touch what relationship with you truly looks like. Let us give thanks in all circumstances and give us the voices to proclaim thanks to you, not only in this next week of Thanksgiving, but all the days of our lives. For you are a God for whom we say, thanks for all you do, for all you are in our lives and the lives of the world around us.